Hi there. Before we get on with today's podcast episode, a quick note about our sponsor, PropTex. PropTex believe that they can increase user engagement on your real estate website by 40%. Sounds too good to be true. If you don't believe it, why not get in touch with them? Why not go to proptex.com? Why not send them an email, visit the guys on LinkedIn and challenge them to prove it? And obviously say that we sent you. And now on with the show. Hello and welcome to the PPW Pod, bringing you news, views, and interviews from the world of real estate marketplaces and PropTech. I am joined by Harvey. How are you doing, Harvey?
Very good, thank you, Ed. Looking forward to an interesting conversation about REA Group today. So I couldn't wait for this one.
Yeah, and we say news, views, and interviews. Today is an interview. We are interviewing our own Simon Baker. How are you, Simon?
I am very, very good at this time. So I had to move my screen here because I got the sun over my shoulder. So very good. Good morning, gentlemen.
So the reason we wanted to do this was that we've had, over the course of doing this podcast now for a while, lots of little kind of anecdotes and interesting little tidbits about what happened with your time at REA Group. I've also had people ask me about your time at REA Group in a bit more detail, and I've basically had to say, I don't know, you'll have to ask Simon. So we thought we'd we'd interview you about your time as the CEO of REA Group. Firstly, and we just asked this off camera, but I want to have it for people watching and listening as well. Is there anything that you can't talk about or don't want to talk about?
Nope.
Okay, you heard.
Do you want the long answer? No.
Okay, so good. I mean, it kind of contextualizes what we're about to talk about, because there are some pretty some interesting things that I think probably won't have come to light since your time at REA Group back in. Actually, can you tell us when was your time at REA Group?
Well, it's good that we're doing it now, because I first got involved with the REA Group a quarter of a century ago. Now, Harvey, you may not have been born at that point in time, but
Don't flatter me, Simon. Don't flatter me. You know very well I was born.
Anyway, no, literally, it was in 2000. So we're here in 2025. It's literally a quarter of a century ago that I got involved with the REA Group.
Okay, we'll start before then. Who actually founded? So you're not a founder of the REA Group. Who founded REA Group?
No.
What was the very early history?
So the very early history is about 1996, more or less. Two gentlemen, Carl Sabeljack and Martin Howe, founded the REA Group and were very quickly joined by Scott Holmes and a guy called Joel Tipping. Okay, now Joel Tipping sort of disappeared off pretty quickly. So it was those three original founders. And Scott Holmes, funnily enough, is still working in the business today, almost 30 years later. And they started it as a company called NetWide Solutions out of a garage. And I've got video of it somewhere of the original office in Mont Albert in Victoria. And I'm sure I'm pretty close with all those facts. And it started off by providing ISP services to real estate agents. So how to help real estate agents connect to the internet, dial this telephone number, I'll then connect you to the internet. That's how we used to do things in the good old days, boys and girls, is that you actually had an ISP that you would call up, and then you had, your modem. You connect the telephone to the modem, and you had the and then that would give you the connection, and away you go. And they started with rows and rows of telephones and so on, and then progressed from that as the basis to then starting to do websites, and then they created what became realestate.com.au. But it started off as netwidesolutions.com. So if you use the Wayback Machine and you put in netwidesolutions.com.au, you're going to see very, very, very ugly early versions of what is now realestate.com.au.
Okay, so very 90s so far, started in a garage like all good companies. NetWide Solutions sounds like an incredibly 90s name. How did you end up involved with REA Group?
Sure. So a couple of interesting things. And the first question is, how did they get hold of realestate.com.au as a domain name, right? Your NetWide Solutions, and you got realestate.com.au, which is a fantastic brand to have. And the answer is they knew someone who worked at the what's called Melbourne IT, who was the domain name handler for Australia. They happened to be mates with someone, and in those days, no one knew much about it. Okay, so they just went, okay, yeah, you can have that, and away they went. So that was just because someone knew someone in that computer geek world, and they got hold of it. And then what happened is Macquarie Bank came along, invested in the business back in maybe 1998 when they had launched realestate.com.au, and they did a very small baby listing on the Australian Stock Exchange. I think they listed at about 20 cents. So I don't know, probably valued the company at maybe 10, $15 million, more or less. Not very much, raised a bit of money. And then they had none of the founders was the CEO at that point. I can't remember the gentleman's name at this point. But they basically started to build the business, spend the money, go through the money, probably made a lot of mistakes along the way. And then that CEO went, and then another CEO, a guy called Nigel, came along and continued to spend money in the business. And the bank account just was basically shrinking at a great rate of knots. They did some capital raisings along the way. And then they got to early 2000, early mid 2000, that they were really on its last wind, last breath. Okay, the company was on its knees, and I had been working in the beginning of 2000 at a startup in the US in a totally different world called the Natural Health Link. So I was in the world of natural health. That company, like many startups at that point in time, had raised money and had spent money and had not really a lot to show for it. And I got a phone call from a guy called Warren Bright, who I'd worked at with McKinsey, who was the COO of what was called News Interactive, which was the digital online businesses for News Corp in Australia. And he said, "Hey, Simon, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm beating my head against a brick wall here in Los Angeles." He goes, "Well, do you want to come back and be head of strategy for News Interactive here in Sydney?" I said, "I'll do that." And so I went back around the Olympics in Sydney time. In fact, I got there maybe a couple of weeks beforehand, went to the Olympics, as you do, because no one did anything for those 2 weeks. And then about a week after the Olympics, I got called into a meeting with this Warren Bright, who was the COO, a guy called Patrice Macquarie, who was the CEO, Lachlan Murdoch. So we were all on the News Corp or the News Limited side. And then on the other side was a guy called John McGrath, and I think he's a lawyer. Can't remember the guy's name. I can remember his face, not his name. And they basically said, "Look, realestate.com.au." And the question is, why was Lachlan meeting, right? Because Lachlan Murdoch was the head of News Limited at that point in time. Why would he meet, right, with these guys? Because John McGrath had sold him his house. That was the story behind it, right? So that got the foot in the door. And John McGrath was on the board of realestate.com.au. So that was the connection. And the pitch from them was basically, "Hey, we're going out of business. You should really look at this. It'd be a really good fit for your newspapers." Simultaneously, News was building within this News Interactive business a website called Homes Online, its version of a property portal that was honestly rubbish. Okay, it was Stephen was the guy who was running. I can't remember his last name now. The guy who was running it. Okay, and it wasn't really going anywhere. Being in the room, it was not like, "Yeah, this is a great deal straight away." I got tasked with having a look at it, but News was actually quite skeptical. So News Limited was very skeptical about this being a good deal. And then over the next maybe month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks maximum, I went through the business looking at it. In fact, I dug up the other day the proposals I wrote for News, all the reports I wrote, etc., from 25 years ago. Still works on PowerPoint, by the way, if anyone's interested. PowerPoint from 25 years ago. And what was interesting was I had to convince Lachlan, the CEO of News Limited and the COO of News Limited at that point in time, to invest into the business. It wasn't a slam dunk, because quite naturally they're looking at realestate.com.au in those days, and they're seeing a business that has an $8 million market cap, or maybe a bit more than the market cap, but not much, maybe 10. It was losing money. It didn't have much left in the bank. It didn't. When you went and sat inside there, they would talk about software products. They had no direction of what they were really doing, and it wasn't a great culture.
Okay, I'm interested, just to interrupt you there, like in terms of proof of concept for news here, so this is the year 2000 we're talking about here. Where
Yes.
is like Rightmove or Seloger or Zillow? How are these companies doing at this point? Are they making big money in their respective markets yet?
No. Zillow didn't exist. Seloger was around. Rightmove was around, but all of them were at the same age and stage, right? They were not massive businesses at this point. Because it's all very early stage, right? And I think at this point, REA had maybe 10, 15% of real estate agents in the market using it. And it was charging $125 per month for all you can eat. Give you an idea, that's £60, about $80 per month per office, not per person, per office, for all you can eat. And there was about 12,000, 14,000 offices in the country.
Could I add another bit of context there, Simon,
Yep.
which is REA wasn't the first player in Australia. So what's happening with Domain at the same time when you're joining the business?
Yes. So the story goes, and I've got a friend who was actually at Domain around that time. Okay, is Domain actually launched probably at the same time as REA, and actually was for a while was ahead of REA back in it's got to be late 1999, early 2000. No, probably late 1999. But it was still buried, and it was called Domain. And why is it called Domain? Because that was the name of the real estate section of of their newspapers, right? So they just used the same name. And Domain started with the business model of, well, if you're charging, I don't know, $1,000 for an ad in a newspaper, you should charge for $1,000 for an ad online. Okay, which is where they've ended up, by the way. It just took a 20-year detour to get there. And they were actually getting that money. And then, of course, REA came in with its all-you-can-eat model and sort of went past Domain at that point in time. That's sort of the structure of the market. And there was also a website called property.com.au that was owned by someone, I don't remember. Maybe it was RP Data, or RP Data bought it from someone else. I can't remember. Too long ago. That was sort of the structure. But a funny story about actually completing the deal. So I remember doing multiple pitches I remember going to Lachlan's house on a Sunday with Patrice, my boss, who was a good friend of Lachlan's, and maybe Warren was there, I can't remember, and I think John Hardigan from News Corp was there, who's the CEO. And we had to go through and I remember going, okay, and it basically said, yeah, okay, let's do this. Okay, so we had to go through the rationale, why it made sense, what the upside potentially could be, and so on. Clearly, we did not envisage it becoming a $30 billion business at this point, but we thought it could be a lot bigger than it was. And then, so News then agreed to inject a massive $2.25 million and $8 million of marketing. And the marketing was really rebranding of the newspapers and running ads in the newspapers and on some of their mass news, their internet sites. Okay. And then I always remember going to the COO of News Corp for him to sign the agreement to invest. And as he signed,
Lachlan Murdoch at this point is what?
He's the chairman.
He's not signing. He's the head of.
He's the chairman.
Right.
He's the executive chairman of News Limited.
So
Okay.
once you've got his sign off, it's a go, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So he's then you had the CEO, a guy called John Hardigan, and the COO, a guy called Peter
Okay.
McCourt. And I always remember going to the COO who's having to sign the contract, and he goes, "You know, this is not a real business, don't you?" As he begrudgingly signed the contract. And it was just a funny story, right? Because at that point in time, I could see why he would think that, right? You're losing a lot of money, it's small, and it was very hard to envisage what the full potential it could be. And I went, okay, what am I going to say, right? There's no point arguing. I was more interested in getting the deal done. And then I went on to the board as an alternate director, because whoever was appointed from News wasn't going to the board meetings. So I would go to the board meetings in their place. And it rapidly became clear that I was going to have a big problem for me personally, because the 2.25 million went to 2 million, went to 1.5 million. It was going in the wrong direction, right? They kept spending money, the guy who was CEO. And so at some point, I said to the chairman, a guy called John Nyland, I said to John, this isn't going so well. And he was looking at me going, yeah, it's not going so well. And he was clearly probably not a bit nervous, because they had convinced News Corp to invest. And the last thing we do is convince News Corp to invest, and the business goes down the toilet. And I said to him, look, I can do a better job than this guy. Here's my plan, right? And John looked at the plan and said, yeah, look, that makes sense. And we did a couple of meetings at his house in Sydney. I remember going there. The board then decided to appoint me as COO of the business, and I then became CEO a month later or 2 months later.
The question is, Simon, what was the plan?
Well, the plan was to focus on the one thing that looked pretty obvious, which was classified listings for real estate agents. It wasn't a complex plan, really. It was basically be very simple in what you do, be very focused, make the product as simple as possible, and then communicate. Just get as many agents signed up as physically possible, and build the audience. I mean, none of this is rocket science, right? But the problem was, in those days there was no playbook. You were literally creating the playbook as you went along. And so when I joined the business, there was at one point we got to about a month's worth of cash. I can't remember exactly the timing of all this. We didn't have a lot of cash left in the business, so we had to get very innovative. And the first thing I remember doing, because the head office was in Melbourne and I was based in Sydney at that moment, and the first thing we did was, apart from removing some of the senior managers who had if they had not jumped ship, had to jump ship, was I remember sitting down in the conference room in Melbourne, and I said to someone in the finance team, I said, can you give me every single contract that we've got? And I thought, this would be pretty easy. They'll all look the same, right? It's like, what are you going to do? It's an all-you-can-eat contract, meaning you pay a price per month, all your listings, that was it. By the time I'd finished, there were 32 piles, right, of different versions of the contract. Some were for 3 months, some were for 6, some for 12, some they had different clauses, different prices, and so on. I'm going, this is nuts, right? I'm not charging $1 billion a month. I'm charging $125, which a real estate agent could afford to pay. And one of them I loved, right? And this is where I knew I had a problem. And it had written in pen on the contract, it said, if at any point in time in the future, this customer is not happy, all funds paid will be returned. Okay. And I went,
ridiculous.
Oh my God. I said, which sales guy? And I saw the sales guy's name, and I thought, well, maybe you're in the wrong, this is not the right job for you. Okay. So that was funny. And that's really where it became clear to me that we had a number of issues. One is we had to make the business as simple as possible internally. Right? How do I make it simple? What is the most valuable product that we could sell? Well, that is a subscription. Okay, because if I sell you, Harvey, a subscription for $125 a month, you give me all your listings, we both win. You're getting advertising, you're getting leads. I'm building content on the website. I've currently got 15% of the Australian market using REA. How do I get to 100%? Because I needed to have market, full listings in the market. Then when people looked at me, they didn't have to look anywhere else. And that was then the game. So we said, one product, we go to all the customers, one price point.
No
Go
refunds.
Sell.
No
Okay,
refunds if you're unhappy.
No
about
refunds.
that. So I've heard from a few people just over the years that vendor paid advertising is now, very, very big in Australia, but it hasn't always been as big as it is now, right?
Yes.
What was it like back then?
Yeah,
And
big.
was it
was
something
big.
that was actively in your mind, in charge of this business, thinking we need to do what we can to grow this way of doing things?
At this point in time, the way it worked then was we charged the agent 125, 150, 200 as the prices go up, or you can eat subscription. Okay, they then charged whatever they wanted to the vendor, and it got bundled up as a internet marketing package, and they might charge 200 per listing. So they were making a profit on us. I know there's an agent in Doncaster that I paid for quite a number of his Mercedes over the years, right? Okay, because he'd just get a Mercedes and he'd make it out of the profit, which clearly you can't do nowadays because they've changed the rules about profiteering on the advertising. And what we didn't have in those points were specific property-based products. It was just all your listings type products. So vendor-paid advertising, we always knew about it. We understood it. It's been around since the 60s, right? Because it was a way in which newspapers could fill up their papers with listings, is to say to the agents, hey, why don't you charge the vendor for this? So that's been around for a long time, right? It was not something new. And what we but what was important about this, the first message out of all this is we got very simple in what we were doing. It became very repetitive, very boring. And I would go to the sales guys and say, can you sign up 16 new customers every month? Okay. And then we had to find really good sales guys to go and sign up new customers. And they would walk in there and no longer could they have anything they could offer. It was just like, it's $150, all you can eat. Please sign this contract. We wanted 12-month contracts, so I knew I didn't have to have a problem with every month going back to them. We told them every 12 months we'll put the prices up, probably around 15%, which we did every July 1st. Prices went up 15% year after year. And we then implemented a scheme of hunting and farming. So I had teams of people like James Gray, who many people who listen will know, and he worked with me then in Sydney. And their job was to go hunt new customers, sign them up. So we went from 15 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50%. And we would do things like you need to do 16 a month. And if we got to, we had like project 3,000, I think it was. And I said, if we get to 3,000 by this date, then everyone goes to Hamilton Island, which is an island off the coast of Queensland. We hit the target. We took the whole company, all 30 of us, right? I think it was at that point, to Hamilton Island for 3 or 4 days of hard work, right? And so on.
When do me and Harvey get to go to Hamilton Island? What's the
I want an invite to Hamilton Island.
Yeah, you can go to the Isle of Wight. Anyway. I'm not going to Hamilton Island. Anyway, so then what we did was just really focused on doing that for many, many years. And then we said, well, how do we improve the product? So we then would roll out a feature property, which went above. Okay, and we created, and then what we did was having hunters and farmers. So then we had a separate team we would set up whose job was to look after the customers. You sign a contract. Thank you very much. We love you very much. I'm now going to hand you over to someone else who's going to look after you every day. Here's their phone number. Give them a call. They'll have a coffee with you. And then their job was to then take a new product to them. Hey, we have a feature property. We have a guaranteed top spot. We have some banner ads. We then started to roll out these new products and
Now, are
services.
you looking at what people, Rightmove or Celoja, are you looking at what people in other countries are doing, in terms of like products, new products, or is it just something that became kind of obvious with how the internet was evolving at that time?
We didn't really look at them at that point in time, because for that 4 years, it was really head down, bum up. Okay. And of course it was not a walk in the park. The industry didn't like us very much. So we had to go and we had some parts of the industry liked us. So Ray White, for example, liked us. They were a shareholder in REA and they did very well out of it. And then people like LJ Hooker, another major franchise group in Australia, didn't like us. And I was showing these to you guys before. These are these are some pretty cool. I've got these. These go back to 2003. Here's one. If anyone's looking at this on YouTube, it says "Our most dangerous competitor," and this was
that's put out by LJ Hooker, a major
LJ Hooker by fax to all their offices, and this was the 27th of November 2003. So this is 22 years old, and it says. We should stop leakages by not supporting internet sites such as realestate.com.au, which also allows private vendors and private sales agents. And then they would have more like this. We've got more. We were the topic of the month, right? In all of these things. I got heaps of them. Clever marketing or clever lies. Okay? They were pretty aggressive against us in those days. Print this out. Give this to, your franchise owners, right? And all it's basically saying is don't advertise on realestate.com.au because they may have a private seller or two and they're worried about their business not selling properties for vendors. Okay?
Simon, could I ask a question there? Which is, when you're seeing these things internally, are you just laughing and getting on with your day, or are you having to think about, okay, we need to change communication strategy?
Downstairs, I've got my legal documents of where we were writing to them going, hey, what are you doing?
Okay,
but no,
so
you do have to change your strategy. Okay, and so let me explain what we did. So there was there was a website in Victoria called Real Estate View. It still exists, and that was industry owned at that point, and they were anti REA as well because they thought because our share price was going up and we were making money in the market, so making money for our shareholders, and we were progressively becoming. The market, we were the market leader at that point in terms of eyeballs, and they were going, well, why don't we own that outcome? And they thought they could own that outcome at least in Victoria or Melbourne, right? Think of like prime location in England, owns within the M25. And so they were, aggressively telling the members not to advertise on us. Now, the lesson I learned out of that was that's great, but whose best interest is that in? Is it in the home seller's best interest, or is it in the best interest of the agent? Well, it's in the interest of the agent, but not the home seller. So we thought, well, that's not very good. So we just went to their website. We got hold of all the addresses, the physical addresses of the houses. We cross-referenced what was on realestate.com.au. at that point in time, and we wrote to them physically a letter. Okay, and we put it in the post, and they received at their house, because we assumed that if someone's advertising their house for sale, they're probably living in it, right? And then they would get a letter in the letterbox saying, "Hi, owner of 123 Baker Street. Do you realize you're not advertising on realestate.com.au? Do you realize that last month there were, and we inserted a number, searches in your suburb last month? Do you realize that you may be missing out on X number of buyers? Talk to your real estate agent about being on realestate.com.au. You've never had so many pissed off but annoyed and annoyed real estate agents call you asking for a subscription.
Okay, I want to talk about the relationship with real estate agents for a minute. You've previously told me before that you had somebody, I don't know if this was something you did periodically or just one off, like trying to find out exactly how much money an agent made, like their exact P&L, what car they're driving, all the rest of it. Did they, did they know you were doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, of course. Then I'd ring them and say, hey, how you going? Tell me about your P&L. I want to understand the industry better, because I do. I want to understand, am I really a cost to them, or is it just fear about something else? Because if it's a financial pressure, I've got a different problem to solve. If it's a fear of losing your job, then I've got another problem to solve. So I wanted to understand. So yeah, I'm going to want to understand the industry better. And I'd always say to them, look, I'm not a real estate agent, and you don't run a website. I'm happy to tell you all about our business so you can understand how it works. I just want to understand about your business so I can give you better service. And what we did to help them feel comfortable that we were open and transparent is that we ran seminars and conferences for agents around the country. I think I probably presented at 70, 80 of these things. And I remember the very first one I did was in Adelaide for some reason, and it was at a motel, not even a hotel, a motel, right? That happened to be in a outer suburb, and it was at this meeting room. It had 20 real estate agents there, and I turned on the projector that I had dutifully bought with me on the plane. So it was me, one bag on one shoulder with my laptop in it, bag on the other shoulder with my projector in it. Turn it on, the bulb broke of the projector. So I'm going, I got a slight problem here. And so luckily we were able to scrounge up another projector straight away. But we did that. We literally walked around and talked to groups as small as 10 to 20 and as large as 200, 300 around the country. And we were very open. We'd say, this is what the industry does. We didn't talk specifically about us. We talked about this is what the online industry does. And this is why you should be backing the industry, online industry, not print. Because in those days, it was about online versus print, not us versus domain.
Right. Okay. That's interesting.
So we positioned ourselves as thought leaders. We positioned ourselves as being industry friendly in the approach. We listened to what was important to them. We said, look, we're not going to put, and I think at one point we said we wouldn't put prices up for our base product by more than 15% per annum. So we gave them comfort. Sign a 1-year contract, lock in your price. So we did a whole bunch of things that we tried to be industry friendly, knowing that we were able to roll out other products that were optional, but eventually became compulsory, that we could make our money on.
Okay. This is all sounding like, operationally very sensible, et cetera, and something that you've clearly articulated how it's gone from a bit of a basket case company into something that's working at this point. But I want to know, to what extent is the success here just a question of timing? So I was reading recently about myhome.com.au, which was a portal that was launched in, I think, 2006. Was backed by Microsoft and a few others, and it failed miserably, right?
Yes.
Is that just a question of, well, we were there first at, the right time, right place, and they weren't? Or, what was there actually a secret sauce that you guys had, or was it kind of a timing thing as well?
Yes, and yes. I actually remember that. So, yeah, 2006, myhome.com. I forgot about them.
It redirects to View now.
That'd be right. My Home, they were launched with maybe the number 60 million comes into my head. Some relatively big number, perceived big number. Was launched, and was it by Microsoft or by Channel 9? I thought it was by 9.
It was some media company that I'd never heard of with backing from Microsoft, per whatever I read the other day.
Yeah, so whenever that occurred, I used to get a phone call from the CEO of News Limited in Australia saying to get on a plane, come to Sydney, because I was living back in Melbourne then, and explain what you're going to do. and I would inevitably walk into that meeting and go, well, I'm not doing anything. Why not? Because we're at this point in time, by 2006, our market cap was around about 600 million, maybe. It was a big market cap. And we had maybe 80% of agents were using us at that point in time. We had millions of eyeballs. And I said, you understand, they've got to get past Real Estate View first. Then they've got to get past Domain. Then they've got to get to us. So the more time I spend looking over my shoulder at a guy who's just launched something, all right, the less time I'm spending looking out the front of the car, worrying about where I'm going. Let them go and burn the money. Every time Domain advertised on TV, our traffic went up because it created awareness of the segment, not just themselves. So I didn't worry because they did, and I had that phone call on multiple occasions. I actually vividly remember that one. Not bad, from 20 years ago. I've been getting on a plane going, oh God. So literally I got a phone call in the afternoon. I was on a plane in the morning going up there to explain why I'm not doing anything.
Okay. So at this point, you're in charge of a business, which is, to use the kind of modern phrase, you're going to the moon, right? To quote some numbers here, revenue in your time went from, I think, 4 million Aussie dollars to 155. And you went from a 6 million loss to a 30 million profit. Like the business has turned around. You're going great. What's that doing to your ego? Are you, your confidence, your ego, what you think, I asked you before about, is this just a timing thing? But in your head, you must be going, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah. So clearly you're not going to, you don't go and try to build these businesses and have zero ego. All right. That's just bullshit. If anyone tells you that, that's bullshit. So at this point in time, a couple of things. One is we're going very well. We have a good team functioning. We had, we might have been going to the moon, but we went to England instead, right? And this is all tied up into this because we did have pretty strong belief about our capacity to basically do anything. Okay, we thought we could. We've turned this around. We're going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. We knew exactly what we're doing and we could do it anywhere. Okay, and there's nothing there's nothing more humbling than realizing that you're full of shit. All right. You happen to be in Australia in a vendor paid advertising market, off being the first mover advantage. You executed well. It's not like you just woke up and you did well, because if that was the case, then REA wouldn't have needed News Corp in the first place, right? You can mishandle it, but through common sense, we handled it very well and accelerated very well and created a very big moat between us and Domain. But we were also fortunate that we did it at the right time, which is when the internet was emerging as a marketing beast, and we also had Domain as a competitor who was still deeply entrenched within the offices of Fairfax Media. Okay, and was not a separate company at that point in time, so it had, that newspaper culture was sort of permutating into it. So we thought we were pretty good at what we were doing. We thought we were actually exceptionally good at what we were doing. We then went, and this is a good segue into international expansion, which for all young players out there, I would be incredibly cautious about.
Simon, before you go further into detail into international expansion, I want to get just a little bit of information. You said that you executed well, but perhaps you didn't do it perfectly. I'm wondering, what kind of parachute did you have behind you, the thing that you could have done to maybe even, put even more rocket fuel into REA during those first few years of growth? What didn't you execute well on before we go on to the international expansion?
Yeah, so I think the one thing we could have done better was employ more salespeople faster. Okay, so we could have gone for the land grab at a faster rate. I had an edge of conservatism in me. I didn't want to push. The business had been run out of money, and I'm talking about this. So I remember one of the directors. I can't remember his name now. And after a board meeting, he said, "Oh, look, I got a question for you." He said, do you have enough salespeople, and are you growing fast enough?" And I said, "Yes, we do." And in hindsight, I should have said, "No, we don't," and I should have employed 5 more or whatever. So I think going faster earlier in that land grab, we would have probably brought forward revenue growth by maybe half a year, maybe even maybe a year. I don't know. Who knows? I'm guessing, right? But it would have been early and fast. That's probably the one area. And then the second thing is realize that the most important thing to realize is that complaints from the industry are just noise. The only things that really matter are the actions that they take. And if you're putting prices up, or you're rolling out new products, or you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, then and they're still your customer, then but complaining, they're still your customer.
Sounds very Rightmove-esque.
Well, but it's true. But it's actually also true. When people start turning you off, then you know you've gone too far. Okay.
Okay, so we're at the peak here. We're at the peak of this story. Where does it start to? Well, you mentioned international expansion. We'll just
So we then expanded. We then thought, let's go. We bought a business in the United Kingdom. We did a joint venture with News International, which is the UK, the Times, etc. News of the World before it got closed down, etc. We did a joint venture with them to have a company called Property Finder, which is now part of Zoopla. We then bought 51% of Property Finder in the Middle East. We owned At Home out of Luxembourg, the Greater Luxembourg region, and we bought Casa.it in Italy. And we also had something in Hong Kong, Square Homes, Square something like that. I can't remember what it's called now. A small business there, which is more of our foothold to understand the Asian market.
That's a lot of acquisitions.
Yeah.
Would you have been better off just doing one and focusing?
No, because we thought we were really good. Okay. Would have been better off? Probably. But each of them are different in nature. And what you learn rapidly is you've got to hire very good people to run them. People who can execute well, people, and at that point in time, Property Finder was number, 3 in the markets. You had Rightmove, you had Find a Home, you had Property Finder, you had a whole bunch of them, right? Prime Location, Rightmove, so I think you got to be careful which one you buy, because it's not a simple task of taking on the number one, and you've got to make sure you've got good people running them, because you can't run them. It's a long commute from Melbourne to London. Okay. So that sort of went a little pear-shaped. Not totally pear-shaped, but a little pear-shaped, and ended up being given away to Zoopla after I had left, which I think was a mistake. They should have taken equity in Zoopla in that thing. They could have got it from Alex Chesterman, because I know, but they just sold it for a song. The at-home business out of Luxembourg was very profitable and a really good little business, and I don't know whether it's now owned by someone else. Casa in Italy was a very good acquisition, because it was the clear market leader, and we bought it for nothing, for 12 million euros. Okay, nothing in those days, and now, of course, is got gobbled up as part of Idealista, and that's because of the business just lost its way. And that's a separate podcast altogether, and all kudos to the Immobiliare guys, right? They did a very, very good job at executing there. And Property Finder, which I think is the worst mistake of all, no, not from my side. It was a bloody good decision by my side, because we bought 51% of Michael Agnani's business, Property Finder, for nothing, $2 million, right? It's now worth probably $1 billion. Okay.
Yeah, we've got, for anyone listening who wants to find out more about that particular deal, we actually interviewed Michael about that whole deal. Yes. I don't know, almost a year ago now. It's one of our most listened to episodes.
Yeah, and he did a
really honest about it as well.
Yeah, he did a fantastic job of buying it back for $300,000 or something. It's in the if you dig into the REA announcements. So that was sort of the expansion, which was, we were basically, by the way, the Australian business was rocketing, right? So it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm betting the house on this or betting the farm on this. but it did become a bit of a distraction in the growth case. You learn a lot in that process about what it takes to grow internationally, which is a non-trivial exercise. A lot of people think it's simple. It's not. It's actually very hard. All the markets are very different in how they operate. Even though the underlying model is the same of listing, advertise, audience, lead, that's the same, but there are subtleties everywhere you look around that. You can't take one model and apply it to all. We went down the path of moving to a common technology platform, which, why? Because that's what you do, right? No, mistake. All right. That was a definite mistake in doing that. And there were a bunch of other mistakes. The mistakes from who you hired to put into various positions through to, I think, at more strategic levels. But if you look in hindsight, would you say having a percentage of Zoopla would have been a good outcome? Yes. Would having a profitable business in Greater Luxembourg a good outcome? Yeah, because it was running at a 40% EBITDA margin, was great. Georg Schmiel, who was my CFO, was running it in his spare time, and he loved it. Having cars, the number one player in Italy, if we'd executed well, would have been worth a hell of a lot today, as we know in that market. And clearly having 51% of Property Finder would have been a good outcome as well. But for various reasons, each one of them didn't achieve their full potential. But hindsight is a very simple thing to have.
Okay, we'll get into, I guess, the end of this interview, and we'll get into probably the most controversial bit of it. So in researching a bit about this, read a kind of curious news article about Simon Baker leaving REA Group back in 2008, and it said something along the lines of Simon Baker had been, I don't know if it was reappointed, or there was a press release in March of that year basically saying, yes, Simon has agreed to stay on as CEO. He's absolutely the right guy for the job in March. And then you left in August with the comments being like, we thank Simon, the very basic, we thank Simon for his whatever. What happened between March and August? How much detail can you give us? Why?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no. I mean, we're talking about 20 years ago. I mean, God, if anyone's still hooked up on something that happened 20 years ago, they should get a psychologist. Okay. The not 28. I got how many years? 18 years ago, 17. First of all, as you grow, so at that point in time, the business cracked $1 billion in market cap. Okay, and was 35 million EBITDA. So you're basically printing $35 million in cash. I think we'd done a dividend. I can't remember now, but and at the same time, all the News Limited papers were going in the other direction at a very fast rate. Okay, so we'd done a very good job at stripping out real estate from them. Seek had done a good job in Australia stripping out jobs, and car sales had done a great job at stripping out cars. So these, what they called rivers of gold, was what they would refer to them internally, had dried up. Now, when that occurs, you start looking at the company where the rivers of gold have gone, and you say, well, we want to have some more control over that. So they being the major shareholder, and via the board, wanted to have even more control over the business in reality. And I was a very prickly character to deal with in that respect, because I was trying to push back, and I was a shareholder, right? So I'm going, no, wait a second, why do I want to do this or that or something which I don't, which to me is not on the plan?
Okay, so what are some examples of things they wanted you to do?
Oh, I was asked, not told to, but asked, maybe I should, we should buy some advertising in the newspapers. Do we want to advertise on Foxtel, which is owned by News, of course? But all of them are legitimate requests. Just when you talk to the ad agency, or you said, is that the best use of the next advertising dollar? The ad agency would say, probably not. Right? So you're then at this point going, well, I want to maximize the outcome. Right? So then you're basically saying, no, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do things differently to the way you want it to go. Okay, and so we then had a parting of the ways. I think how this is, and I've probably told this story before, but how news handle it was really woeful. The then chairman asked me to meet him at a hotel, actually, for what I thought was a catch-up meeting. He was there with a lawyer and said, "You're not to go back to the office and you're fired." Right? Because that's how news handled things in those days, right? They didn't understand there could be good leaders in the process, and that was sort of. And then I couldn't even go back to the office and get my stuff, right? But dutifully, of course, I did, because I just went with one of the other guys and they opened the door and I took all my stuff, right? That was there. And because they even said, "I will box up and send to your house." I'm going, wait a second, I've been here 8 years and built this thing for you. It's now worth $1 billion, of which you own 650 million of it. You could probably handle this a bit better. Anyway, so suffice to say, it was at that point in time, quite a traumatic experience. Not one that I would encourage on anyone. I think you should, if you are going to terminate someone for whatever reason, right? Doesn't matter the reason. You got to do it in a way that's fair and reasonable, okay, and one that treats people with respect. And so, was it the right time to leave? Probably. The hard work had been done, to be honest. If you think about what's harder, going from 15% of the market to 100% of the market using the product, okay, and then you keep pushing prices and you take your market leadership and so on upwards, or increasing prices and rolling out new products. And clearly the first half of the journey, learning what to do, writing a playbook in a market that didn't exist, was probably the hardest part of the job. Now, of course, it's much easier, right? You're the market leader. Everyone knows they've got to use you. Everything is sort of a lot clearer on what you do in the process. So that was the less than exciting way to end 8 years of working for a company. Okay, but I also think that if they had actually sat down and said, "Look, this is what we want to do. We've got a disagreement on elements on how to run the business," then I would have said, "Okay, that's fine. Then I'll transition out. You can bring someone in, and we'll have a smooth handover." And I would have done that. I mean, 8 years of literally 24 hours a day, it cost me a lot personally in this whole process. It wasn't just a job. It's not like a 9-to-5 job. I was working very long hours for a very long time. It should have been handled differently. And I would do it differently. I think most people would do it differently.
Okay, so I mean, News Corp. This is obviously your, one person's opinion, one person's perspective of how News Corp, handled that asset at that time.
And by the way, funny story.
Go on.
The not to name names, but do you remember Justin Langer?
Yep,
the Australian cricket coach.
Yeah,
he was the coach of the Australian cricket team who woke up one day and got fired.
Yep,
same guy. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Move on.
Okay. Anyway. All right. Where I was going with this is, so you've painted a picture, either deliberately or not deliberately, of this overbearing shareholder, which initially doubted the deal and then told you it wasn't a real business, and then let you go in kind of not a great way. The kind of broader question, I think, is, do you think that these big media companies owning real estate portals, is it an asset or is it just a big hindrance? Because we see a lot of the more successful real estate portals out there don't have these big overbearing shareholders. Rightmove, Zillow's, all the rest of them. They're just their standalone companies. And I mean, just kind of really anecdotally, it does seem like those companies do a bit better than the ones with the big media company behind them.
I think that used to be the case, okay? But I don't think it's the case anymore. I think the world has moved on enough nowadays that they're not protecting any of their old assets, historically they were protecting assets. They were protecting the print revenues, the rivers of gold, however you want to call it. Nowadays, that's gone, right? So I think nowadays the as long as whoever's being given the marching orders to run the business is allowed to get on and run it, and it's done within clear guidelines, and this is the outcome we want, and so on, and you've got someone who's super capable, then you'll get a great outcome in that process. I think where it gets harder is when you have people coming in and they parachute in. Oh, you should be doing stuff this way, and then they depart. And then they come back in again a month later going, why haven't you done this? And going, well, because it didn't actually make sense, right? Because I'm eating and breathing this business. I've spent more time in an afternoon on this business than you do in a month. Okay. And there's this, but this is always the challenge of board members and so on. And that's where it becomes quite challenging.
Simon, okay. Could I ask one question before we get out of here? Because I know we're nearing an hour.
We are over time.
Yeah, so you've been made CEO of REA again. What's the first thing you do tomorrow?
Oh, if I woke up tomorrow as the CEO of REA with CoStar coming in owning Domain, I would do everything possible to understand the CoStar playbook, because I know that's going to come my way. Right. So what have they done in the United States in an attacker mode? What have they done in the United Kingdom in attacker mode? What do they do? Right. How do they leverage? What do you call it?
Matterport.
Matterport. Thank you very much. How much are they spending on marketing and so on? All this stuff, because it's going to come. Right. It has to come. Why? It's unlikely they're going to do something totally different. And then I'd say, okay, what am I going to do to prepare for that and ensure that there is minimal negative impact? And then what could I do to twist it to my favor? That's what I'd be doing, because look at it today. REA, yeah, they've got India, they've got Realtor.com in the US and so on, but where's the big engine? The honking great big 12-cylinder engine is sitting in Australia generating a heap of cash, and you don't want to have anything that starts to negatively impact that.
All right. As Harvey said, we've nearly run to an hour. Thank you very much for being candid about that, Simon. I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate that.
Okay. Excellent. That was fun. Trip down memory lane, 25 years.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be other anecdotes that will come out over the course of the next year or so of doing this podcast, but it was nice to hear them all in one nice, succinct episode. So Thank you.
No problems. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.